My sister smiled at me across my mother's dining room table and said, "We're just worried about you, Nadia." And I knew right then. I knew exactly what she was doing. Let me back up. No, actually, let me not back up. Because that's the thing about what Diane did. It was so slow, so careful, so perfectly constructed, that by the time I understood what was happening, half the people in my life already believed her version of me. My name is Nadia Flores. I'm 29 years old. I'm a licensed occupational therapist based in Austin, Texas. I work with adults recovering from neurological injuries. I assess cognition, function, behavior. I am professionally, literally, trained to observe patterns in human behavior and identify when something is off. And my own sister almost fooled me. If you're new here, stay with me until the end of this one. And if this story hits close to home, please like and subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you know. So, the dining room. My mother's house. It was a Sunday, which meant pot roast, and the particular kind of tension our family has always dressed up as normalcy. Diane was there with her husband, Marcus. My mom was at the head of the table, looking tired in the way she always looks tired, like she's carrying something she won't name. And I was there because I go every Sunday. I've gone every Sunday for years. I bring the bread, I sit in the same chair. It is the most stable, predictable thing in my entire week. That's important. Remember that. Diane said we were just worried about me. And I looked at her and said, "Worried about what exactly?" She did this thing. This soft exhale, like the question itself was painful to answer, like she'd been hoping I wouldn't make her say it out loud. "You've been through a lot, Nadia. The breakup, the apartment situation. You've seemed really overwhelmed lately." My breakup was 8 months ago. The apartment situation she was referencing was me choosing to move into a smaller place after my lease ended, which I did deliberately, intentionally, to save money. A completely rational adult decision. "I'm not overwhelmed," I said. "I'm financially responsible." She nodded in that slow, careful way that means she's not agreeing with you. She just wants you to feel heard so you'll stop pushing. I know that technique. I use it professionally, with patience. Watching my sister use it on me at the dinner table made something cold settle in my chest. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out until 3 days later, was that Diane had already made 2 phone calls that week. One to our family's estate attorney, one to the financial oversight trustee managing the trust our grandfather left us. Our grandfather's trust. That's where this really lives. Our grandfather passed 4 years ago. He left a trust split between me and Diane, structured to release in full when we each turned 30. I turned 30 in 5 months. My portion is $140,000. Diane received hers 2 years ago, on her 30th birthday, no questions asked. 5 months away from that money, my sister suddenly became very concerned about my mental stability. I didn't put that together at the Sunday dinner. I'm telling you now so you understand what I was walking into. At the table, I just felt that cold thing in my chest and decided to stay quiet and watch. That's my move. Always has been. I got it from my grandfather, actually. Well, he used to say, "The person who speaks last in a room usually understands it best." Marcus barely said anything the whole meal. That was unusual. He's normally the one filling silences with sports scores and half-finished opinions. That night, he kept his eyes on his plate and only spoke when Diane spoke first. I noticed that. Filed it away. My mom didn't take sides. She never does. She made the pot roast and passed the rolls and changed the subject twice. And when I was leaving, she hugged me a half-second longer than usual. That half-second told me more than anything Diane said at that table. Something was already in motion. I just didn't know how far it had gone. I drove home that night with the radio off, running through the conversation the way I run through patient assessments. What was said? What wasn't said? The timing, the framing, the way Diane had set the table, metaphorically, before I even walked in the door. Pot roast Sundays don't usually include formal expressions of family concern. Someone planned that moment. My phone buzzed when I was stopped at a red light. A text from Diane. Love you. Just want to make sure you're okay. Always here if you need anything. I stared at it for a second. The light turned green. I didn't respond. I spent that night going through my own life like I was building a file. My job, stable, respected, 4-year record with no complaints. My apartment, clean, organized, affordable, intentional. My finances, a credit score of 748, 0 missed payments, $9,000 in savings. My mental health, therapy every other week, which I started voluntarily 2 years ago because I believe in being proactive, not because anything was wrong. By midnight, I had a very clear picture. My life was not the life of an unstable woman. But Diane wasn't arguing facts. She was arguing feelings, impressions. Whisper campaigns don't need evidence. They just need enough people to start wondering. And that's when I felt it shift inside me. Not panic. Not hurt. Something quieter. Something focused. I opened my laptop, and I started to write everything down. The call from the estate attorney came on a Wednesday afternoon. His name was Gerald Puth, and he had handled our family's legal affairs for 15 years. He was polite, formal, the kind of man who chooses every word the way you choose shoes, deliberately, for the occasion. He said there had been a request from a concerned family member to review the trust distribution timeline, specifically to determine whether a psychological evaluation might be warranted before my portion released. I let him finish. I wrote down every word he said on the notepad I'd kept open on my desk since Monday. Mr. Puth, I said, who filed the request? A pause. I'm not at liberty to say at this stage. Is there a legal mechanism by which a trust beneficiary can be denied their distribution based on a family member's concern? Another pause. Longer this time. There are provisions in certain documented cases of incapacity. I'm not incapacitated, I said. I'm a licensed healthcare professional with a clean 4-year employment record. What documentation was submitted with this request? He cleared his throat. I'm not able to share that at this time. Okay, I said. Thank you for calling. I hung up. Then I sat very still for about 45 seconds. Then I picked the phone back up and called my own attorney. Her name is Patricia Wren. I met her 3 years ago when I needed help with a lease dispute that turned out to be nothing, but I kept her number because she was sharp, direct, and had zero patience for nonsense. All qualities I respect deeply. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is rare and valuable. So your sister is trying to trigger an incapacity clause, Patricia said when I finished. That's what it sounds like. Does the trust document have one? I don't know yet. I need a copy. Get me a copy by Friday, she said. And Nadia, don't talk to Diane. Not yet. Don't tip her off that you're moving. I said I wouldn't. And then I spent the next 24 hours thinking about every interaction I'd had with Diane in the past 6 months, re-examining each one with this new information sitting behind my eyes like a filter. There were things that hadn't made sense at the time, that made sense now. In January, Diane had called to ask how I was really doing after the breakup. She asked 3 times in slightly different ways whether I'd been sleeping, whether I'd been eating. I'd found it touching at the time. Sisterly concern. Looking back, it felt like an intake interview. In February, she came to visit my new apartment. She walked through it slowly, the way people do when they're appraising something. She commented that it was very minimal. I'd laughed and said I liked it that way. She'd nodded and said, as long as you're okay. 3 times that visit. As long as you're okay. In March, she'd mentioned, casually, that she'd run into my old coworker Janet at a coffee shop. She said Janet mentioned I'd been stretched thin at work. I'd never said that to Janet. I don't even talk to Janet outside of staff meetings. I wrote all of it down. Dates. Details. Exact words where I could remember them. And then there was the thing with my mom. 2 weeks before the Sunday dinner, my mother had called me out of nowhere and asked if I was managing okay financially, which was strange because my mom never asks about money. It's not her language. She grew up not talking about it, and that habit never left her. When I asked her why she was asking, she got vague. Said she'd just been thinking about me. She wanted to make sure I was settled. Someone had talked to my mom before they talked to me. Diane had been building a case. Not out of nowhere. She'd been laying groundwork for months, and the thing that made it so effective, so genuinely hard to defend against, is that none of it was dramatic. There were no accusations, no confrontations, just quiet, consistent planting of a single idea. Nadia isn't doing as well as she seems. I thought about the trust document. $140,000 releasing in 5 months. I thought about what would happen to that money if my distribution were delayed or redirected. The trust language would determine that. I needed to read every word of it. I called my mom that evening. Kept it light. Asked about her week. Then I asked if she still had a copy of Grandpa's trust document. She said she thought so. In the filing cabinet in the spare room. I drove over Thursday morning while Diane would be at work. My mom made tea and sat at the kitchen table and watched me go through the filing cabinet with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I found the document and started reading, she said, "Nadia, is something going on?" I looked up. "I'm just reviewing some things, Mom. Diane called me last week," she said. "She said she was worried about some choices you've been making." "What choices specifically?" My mom looked down at her tea. "She said you'd been spending in ways that didn't seem like you. That you'd been..." She stopped. "Erratic?" I offered. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. I went back to the document. I found the clause on page 11. It was narrow, but it was there. In cases of documented psychological incapacity as determined by a licensed evaluator, and supported by at least 2 family member affidavits, the trustee had discretion to delay distribution for up to 18 months pending review. 18 months. My sister wasn't trying to take my money. She was trying to make sure I couldn't access it while she figured out how. I photographed every page of that document and sent it to Patricia before I left. Driving home, I kept thinking about the word affidavits. 2 family members. My mom hadn't said she'd signed anything. But she hadn't said she hadn't. Patricia called me Friday evening, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's already 3 steps ahead of a problem and wants you to catch up fast. "The clause is real, but it's narrow," she said. "They'd need a formal psychological evaluation from a licensed professional. Plus 2 signed affidavits from family members attesting to specific behaviors. Not just general concern. Specific, documented behaviors with dates. So Diane would have to convince 2 people to sign something official." Correct. And that's harder than a phone call to the attorney. The question is how far along she is. I told Patricia about my mom's reaction. The tea. The way she'd gone quiet when I said the word erratic. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Has your mom mentioned anything specific? Anything Diane told her that she's repeated to you?" I thought back. "She mentioned spending. That I'd been spending in ways that didn't seem like me." "Okay. Nadia, I need you to pull your last 6 months of bank statements and credit card records. Everything. Bring them to me on Monday. If they decide to pursue this formally, your financial records are your first line of defense." I already had them printed by Saturday morning. I'm a little compulsive about organization. I keep a folder, digital and physical, of every financial document going back 4 years. It started after a billing dispute with my old insurance provider and became a habit. Diane used to tease me about it, called it my anxiety folder. That folder was about to save me. I went through 6 months of transactions. Every purchase, every transfer, every subscription. Nothing unusual. My spending was boring. Groceries, gas, my therapy co-pays, an occasional dinner out, 2 pairs of shoes in March that were on sale, no large cash withdrawals, no mystery transfers, no erratic anything, which meant Diane didn't have real financial evidence. She was working with impressions, with the story she'd been telling people, not with facts. So where was she planning to get the facts? That question sat with me all weekend. And then, on Sunday, I went to my mother's house for pot roast like I always do. because Patricia told me to keep my routine completely unchanged, and something happened that answered it. Marcus wasn't there. Diane said he was working. A Sunday. Marcus is in commercial real estate and occasionally works weekends, so I didn't immediately react, but there was something about the way she said it, quickly, before I could ask, that made me note it. Dinner was quieter than usual. My mom talked about her garden. I talked about a patient milestone at work. Diane asked me questions. Careful questions. Have you been sleeping okay? Are you still seeing your therapist? How's the new apartment? Do you feel settled there? One by one, slow and casual. She was building a record. I realized it about the third question. She had her phone on the table face up. Not unusual on its own, but the screen didn't go dark the way it does when a phone is just sitting there. The screen stayed on. She was recording the conversation. I felt something move through me. Not panic, more like the feeling of all your puzzle pieces suddenly dropping into the right places at once. The questions weren't sisterly concern. They were prompts. She was trying to get me to say something she could use, something that sounded like instability, confusion, emotional distress. I took a breath. I sipped my water. And I made a decision in about 4 seconds. I would give her nothing useful. And I would give her something else instead. I started talking about work. Specific, technical, confident. I talked about a patient who'd regained hand function after a stroke. Walked Diane through the assessment process. Used clinical language. Laughed comfortably. Asked my mom follow-up questions about her tomatoes. I was warm. Grounded. Specific. I looked like someone with an organized mind and a full, stable life. Because I am someone with an organized mind and a full, stable life. I was just performing it deliberately now instead of accidentally. When I left, I sat in my car and let myself feel what I'd been holding in all evening. It wasn't just anger. It was something older and sadder than anger. This was Diane, my sister, who used to let me sleep in her bed during thunderstorms. Who drove 4 hours to help me move into my first apartment. Who called me every year on the anniversary of our grandfather's death because she knew I'd be quiet that day. That Diane had spent months quietly engineering a story about my mental health. Had called attorneys and trustees. Had sat across from me recording dinner conversation. For money. $140,000. I drove home. I cried in the elevator because I didn't want to cry in the parking garage where there were cameras. Then I washed my face, made tea, and called Patricia. I told her about the phone. She said, "Good. You didn't react?" "No." "And she got nothing useful?" "Nothing." "Okay," Patricia said. And there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Satisfaction. "Then she's got a narrative with no evidence, and we're about to start building yours." There was one more thing I'd noticed at dinner. Something I almost missed because I was focused on Diane's phone. My mom, at one point, had reached across the table and touched Diane's hand. Not me. Diane. It was a quick gesture, and my mom immediately went back to her food. But it was the kind of touch that means, "I'm sorry this is hard," not, "I'm worried about Nadia. I'm sorry this is hard," addressed to Diane. My mom knew more than she was saying, and I was starting to wonder whether she'd already signed something. Monday morning, I walked into Patricia's office with a printed binder. 6 months of bank statements, credit card records, pay stubs, my therapy attendance record, which my therapist had agreed to provide as a letter confirming voluntary engagement and consistent attendance, and a copy of my occupational therapy license with my most recent performance review attached. Patricia looked at the binder and said, "Did you stay up all night?" "Only until 2, I said. She almost smiled. "Okay, here's where we are." She'd already contacted the trustee's office. There had in fact been a formal written request filed. She couldn't get the exact text yet, but it had been submitted 8 days ago, which meant Diane filed it the week before the Sunday dinner. She'd already moved before she sat across from me with that soft exhale and said, We're just worried about you. The timeline hit different when I saw it laid out like that. She'd already filed paperwork before she'd even had the courtesy to pretend to be concerned to my face. What do we do? I asked. We file a counter-documentation package, Patricia said. A comprehensive record of your functional, financial, and psychological stability. We make it so thorough and so clean that any evaluator who looks at it sees not just a stable person, they see someone whose life is better documented than most. And the affidavits? That's the part I want to talk about. Patricia had done some digging. The clause required 2 family member affidavits. Our family, on my dad's side, is small. My dad passed when I was 16. His side doesn't stay in contact. On my mom's side, there's my mom, Diane, and an uncle who lives in Phoenix and hasn't been to a family dinner in 11 years. Diane counts as 1, Patricia said. She filed the request. She's clearly willing to sign. The question is the second signature. My mom, I said. Has she said anything to indicate she would? I thought about the hand touch across the table. The vague phone call about money. The way she'd gotten quiet when I said the word erratic. Not directly, I said, but she knew about the request before I did. Diane talked to her first. You need to talk to your mom, Patricia said. Not to convince her of anything. Not to pressure her. Just to tell her what's actually happening. Specifically, tell her what happens to your distribution if it's delayed. Tell her what the 18 months means. And then tell her what you have in this binder. I'd been avoiding that conversation because I didn't want to put my mom in the middle. But she was already in the middle. Diane had put her there. I was just the last one to show up. I called my mom that afternoon and asked if I could come over. She said yes. She sounded relieved, which told me something. I brought 2 things. The binder and a copy of the specific trust clause, highlighted. We sat at the kitchen table again. Tea again. And I didn't start with emotion. I started with the document. I showed her the clause. I showed her what 18 months delay actually meant. I showed her my financial records and explained every line. I showed her the therapy letter and the performance review and the license and the employment record. I didn't cry. I didn't ask her to choose sides. I just showed her the facts. My mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Diane told me you'd stopped going to your therapy appointments. I haven't missed one in 14 months, I said, and I put the attendance letter in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. She told me you'd made some large transfers that concerned her, my mom said, that you'd sent money somewhere you couldn't explain. Mom, I said, I have 6 months of statements right here, every transaction. Show me what you're talking about, and I'll explain it. She didn't have specifics. Because Diane hadn't given her specifics. She'd given her impressions and concern, and that careful soft exhale, and my mom, who loves her daughters and was trying to protect one of them, had accepted a story she was never shown evidence for. My mom's eyes filled. She didn't let the tears fall. She never does. But they were there. I haven't signed anything, she said quietly. She sent me something. A document. I told her I needed to think about it. I exhaled so slowly. When did she send it? 10 days ago. 10 days. She'd been sitting on it for 10 days and hadn't signed. Something in her had hesitated. Maybe the same something that made her hug me a half-second longer at the door. Mom, I said, I'm not asking you to do anything against Diane. I just need you to know the truth before you make any decision. That's all I came here for. She nodded. She looked down at the binder. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Do you know why she needs the money? I went still. What do you mean? My mom pressed her lips together. Marcus's business. Diane told me a few months ago they were having some trouble. I didn't ask questions. But she mentioned it twice. She paused. I thought it was just stress. I didn't think. She stopped. But I'd already heard enough. Marcus. The commercial real estate business. The Sunday he wasn't at dinner. The way Diane had moved fast. Filing paperwork before she even had a conversation with me. And the $140,000 sitting in a trust 5 months from release. Diane didn't just want to control the narrative. She needed the clock to stop. 18 months of delay would give her and Marcus time to figure out something I didn't fully understand yet. But I was going to find out. I squeezed my mom's hand. I packed up the binder. And on the way to my car, I texted Patricia 3 words. It's about Marcus. Patricia found it in 4 days. She has a researcher she works with on financial matters, and once you know where to look, these things are rarely as hidden as people think. Marcus's commercial real estate firm had 2 active lawsuits filed against it. One from a former business partner, one from a property investor. The partner suit alleged misrepresentation of assets. The investor suit alleged funds being moved without authorization. Both had been filed in the past 7 months. Both were ongoing. Marcus was in serious legal and financial trouble. And Diane knew. Which meant Diane wasn't just trying to get my trust money, she was trying to delay my access to it long enough to either redirect it somehow through the trust mechanism, which Patricia said was a stretch legally but not impossible if the trustee were manipulated, or simply to protect her own household from having to answer questions about where money was going. There was also this. Patricia found that Marcus and Diane had refinanced their home 7 months ago and taken a $90,000 cash out. 4 months later, Diane filed the request to delay my distribution. The timeline was its own story. I need to be honest about how I felt when Patricia told me all of this. I want to tell you I felt vindicated. And I did. But underneath that, there was something much heavier, because Diane was scared. Her marriage was in financial freefall, and she was watching it happen, and she made a choice that I will never fully forgive, but I also understand in this terrible way that I wish I didn't. She was desperate, and desperate people stop asking what's fair and start asking what works. It didn't make what she did okay, it just made it human, and somehow that was harder. Here's what happened next. Patricia sent a formal counter-documentation package to the trustee. My complete financial history, the therapy letter, the employment record, the license, a written statement from my direct supervisor, and a letter from Patricia outlining the conflict of interest inherent in the claim. Specifically, that the requesting party's spouse was currently subject to active financial litigation, which created direct incentive to interfere with a trust distribution to a third party. The trustee responded within a week. The request was formally suspended pending review. That meant no evaluation, no delay, not yet. The clock was paused while they assessed the validity of the original claim, and then Patricia made the call that changed everything. She contacted Diane directly. I wasn't on that call. Patricia doesn't let clients sit in on those conversations, and honestly, I was grateful. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that Patricia presented the documentation we had, including the information about Marcus's lawsuits and the refinancing timeline, and made it clear that if the trust claim moved forward, that information would become part of the formal record and would likely be discoverable in Marcus's existing litigation. Diane withdrew the request 2 days later. No explanation. No phone call to me. Just gone, like it had never existed. I heard from my mom first. She called on a Thursday evening and said Diane had told her she'd decided to step back, that she'd been too worried and acted too fast. My mom's voice was careful and tired. She wasn't asking me to respond to that framing. She was just reporting what she'd been told. I said, "Okay, Mom. Thank you for telling me." She said, "Nadia, I'm sorry. I knew she didn't mean for the phone call. I knew she meant for the 10 days she'd sat on that document, for almost signing something she didn't fully understand because her other daughter had asked her to." "I know," I said. "It's okay. It wasn't entirely okay. I don't know if it fully will be. But it was enough for that phone call." I haven't spoken to Diane since the Sunday dinner. She texted me twice in the weeks after the withdrawal. The first message said she loved me and hoped we could talk soon. The second said she was sorry for the stress. I read both messages. I haven't responded to either one. Not because I'm punishing her. I just don't know what to say yet, And I refuse to pretend I do. My therapist says that's actually healthy. That sitting with something before performing resolution is better than rushing toward closure that isn't real yet. She also said something that stuck with me. She said, "The most unsettling part of this isn't what your sister did. It's that she almost made other people believe a version of you that didn't exist." Yeah. That's the part that stays. My trust distribution releases in less than 3 months now. The process is back on track. Patricia says, absent any new valid claims, it will proceed on schedule. I'm not letting myself fully believe it until the money is actually in my account. I've learned to not count on things that aren't in front of me yet. But here's what I know right now. I documented everything. I moved quietly. I let the truth do its job without making a scene. I didn't blow up the family. I didn't send a group text. I didn't confront Diane at Sunday dinner. I just built a record so solid that her story had nowhere to land. My grandfather used to say the person who speaks last in a room usually understands it best. I held on to that. I waited. I watched. And I came prepared. And if you are going through something where someone is trying to control how other people see you, write everything down. Date it. Save it. Document your own life with the same care you'd use if you knew someone was watching. Because sometimes they are. If this story hit something in you, please leave a comment below. I want to know if you've been through something like this. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support means everything.